Doings of Doyle is sponsored by Belanger Books, home of the best Sherlock Holmes anthologies featuring today's top Sherlockian authors. Belanger Books is the only authorised publisher of Solar Pond's mysteries, continuing the Sherlock Holmes legacy into the 21st century. Visit them today at belangerbooks.com. Welcome to Doings of Doyle, a podcast dedicated to the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Professor Challenger, Brigadier Gerard, and of course, Sherlock Holmes. I'm Mark Jones.
And I'm Paul Chapman. And together we'll be exploring Doyle's eclectic bibliography to understand more about the great man's life and work. We'll be discussing his fiction and non-fiction, the well-known and the obscure.
And stopping by Baker Street along the way. You'll find out more at doingsofdoyle.com or follow us at doingsofdoyle.com on Blue Sky. Hello and welcome to episode 64. This episode, we travel to Wiltshire, where an Indian army surgeon is being hounded by a very unwelcome visitor in The Story of the Brown Hand from 1898. And here's Paul to set the scene.
Following his retirement to an estate on the edge of Salisbury Plain after 40 years' service in India, Sir Dominic Holden has invited his nephew, Dr Hardacre, to stay for a weekend. Hardacre assumes that this is simply a family courtesy, as he is only sixth in the line of inheritance to his uncle's fortune. He finds a hospitable enough household, but one wrapped in a tense gloom, whose source he cannot fathom. Until, that is, Sir Dominic shows great interest in Hardacre's ghost hunting exploits with the Psychical Research Society.
The Story of the Brown Hand is the last of the 12 Round the Fire stories which were serialised in the Strand magazine over 1898 and 1899, and it's fair to say that they were written out of financial necessity, because in 1897 Conan Doyle had commissioned the building of Undershaw, his private family home in Surrey, which needed many modifications to suit his wife Louisa. That project ultimately went over budget, and it was more costly to fit out than he expected, and so he needed to find a way of bridging the financial gap. He initially turned to Sherlock Holmes and wrote a play, but it was rejected by both Herbert Beerbohm Tree and by Henry Irving, although it would eventually be picked up by William Gillette. But for now, that was not going to help his financial woes. So in December 1897, he told his mother that he intended to, quote, write some short stories to raise the wind. And these turned out to be the Round the Fire stories, a series of macabre campfire tales. Now, unusually, we can be very precise about when this story was written because Conan Doyle's pocket diary for 1898 survives in the British Library, and he recorded the completion dates and the story lengths at the back of the journal, alongside his fluctuating weight as he was trying to lose it at the time. He submitted the first story, The Beetle Hunter, on the 13th of March, 1898, and the final one, The Brown Hand, on the 5th of October. And in total, the 12 stories took him about 7 months to write. On a rough estimate, he was paid £270 for the story, which is equivalent to £22,000 today. So it's a good example of how popular and in demand Conan Doyle was. Now, one might have thought that he would have rushed immediately to anthologizing the stories to raise a bit more cash, but clearly he was not so keen on doing so. And a letter to his mother in 1903 shows he was effectively suppressing the publication of the Round the Fire stories. Perhaps he didn't feel that they were fitting with his newfound status as a knight of the realm. But he eventually relented, and in 1908 the stories were collected, along with a rather perplexing mix of short stories from different time periods, including Jelland's Voyage and A Pot of Caviar. But nevertheless, Round the Fire stories makes for a terrific collection, and aside from a few clunkers, it's a very entertaining one. And all the Round the Fire stories are really great examples of Conan Doyle going back to his Gothic roots.
Yeah, it's interesting that he's heading in this sort of literary direction. At the time, there was the story itself. The Brown Hand is set on the edge of Salisbury Plain, and there was a reason why he set it there, which we'll come into later in the discussion. But the very ambience of the place
Mhm.
obviously stirred something within his Gothic soul,
Yes.
and appealed to him at a literary level. And you can really find this out. As you read the story, we start going into kind of Mrs. Radcliffe
Yes.
territory in many ways. And you've got this as the main character, Dr. Hardacre, when he's on the way to
Mm.
visit his uncle. He says this: As I drove from Dinton Station in the waning light of that autumn day, I was impressed by the weird nature of the scenery. The few scattered cottages of the peasants were so dwarfed by the huge evidences of prehistoric life that the present appeared to be a dream and the past to be the obtrusive and masterful reality. The road wound through the valleys, formed by a succession of grassy hills, and the summit of each was cut and carved into the most elaborate fortifications, some circular and some square, but all on a scale which has defied the winds and rains of many centuries. So
Mm.
this is classic Gothic scene
Mm.
setting here, and Doyle is obviously a bit of a master at this, and you'll also notice from that there's a prefiguring in that of the Hand of the Baskervilles and Dartmoor with the prehistoric. You've got the moorland, you've got the weird scenery, everything is there. So this is almost a short dry run for
Yes.
the Hand of the Baskervilles in that way. And then you get to he gets to his uncle's house, Rodenhurst,
Mm.
which a name which is interesting in itself, and again we'll discuss that shortly. But he puts, it was through this weird country that I approached my uncle's residence of Rodenhurst, and the house was, as I found, in due keeping with its surroundings. Two broken and weather-stained pillars, each surmounted by a mutilated heraldic emblem, flanked the entrance to a neglected drive. A cold wind whistled through the elms which lined it, and the air was full of the drifting leaves. At the far end, under the gloomy arch of trees, a single yellow lamp burned steadily. In the dim half-light of the coming night, I saw a long, low building, stretching out two irregular wings, with deep eaves, a sloping gambrel roof, and walls which were crisscrossed with timber balks in the fashion of the Tudors. So the house itself fits this whole Gothic scene. And again, you look at that description, then you get to Baskerville Hall, and
Yes, the same
yeah,
thing, isn't it?
it's we've essentially got the same drive up, but we don't have an escaped criminal wandering around Salisbury Plain. But other than that, you can definitely see how this story is it's getting into his mind, ready for reuse, as it were, in the Hound.
Yeah.
But that's not to belittle this story. This story is brilliant in its own odd little way.
Yeah.
But definitely we're definitely back in that whole the Gothic scenery, which he so loves, and it's again, he's so good at this.
Yes.
The details with the drifting leaves and everything is just, he knows this sort of material inside out, and he knows how to use it, and it really just sets things up beautifully.
Yes, it does. And
Mm,
I think I was struck particularly by that reference to the prehistoric life.
mm,
And yes, you've got echoes of the Hound, you've got the Devil's Foot would follow later. You've
mm,
got similar
mm,
kind of things, but also it's that sense that there is something ancient and unknown, and where you just get the footprints of the past that are
mm.
going to intrude on the present, and that is immediately setting up this idea that the past is connecting with the present. And the reason why he's using all these Gothic tropes at the beginning is that he's going to play with our expectations as he goes through this story.
And yet, as a reader, you wonder where he's going with it. You're
Oh
at
yeah.
Salisbury Plain, and obviously in an earlier episode, we discussed the Bloodstone tragedy, his youthful druid story, and I'm sure he knows that a lot of readers are going to think, oh, when we're going to get to Stonehenge
Yeah.
with this. So he's playing with reader expectations as well, and not leads you off in a totally different direction.
Mm. And so we then arrive at Rodenhurst, this
Mm,
the manor house of Sir Dominic Holden. And Sir Dominic is described as being the most distinguished Indian surgeon of his day. And we learn that he is both a commander of the Order of the Bath and also a Knight Commander of the Order of the Star of India. And that latter was established by Queen Victoria in 1861 to recognize distinguished service in India, but also really to kind of reward those who'd remained faithful during the mutiny. And there were a number of medics who received that over the preceding sort of 20 years. People like Sir Auckland Colvin, who was Lieutenant Governor of the Northwestern Provinces, who did a lot of work in public health. You have Sir William Erskine Ward, who was a senior medical officer in India, later the Chief Commissioner of Assam, who worked on public health and hygiene, and who had a son who was a first-class cricketer, so almost certainly
Mm.
knew Conan Doyle that way. And then you have a series of Indian rulers, people like the Prime Minister of Nepal, also got this as part of this kind of using of the honours system to retain control. But you think you found somebody who is actually a very specific inspiration for the character of Dominic Holden.
Yeah, it's I don't think there's any coincidence here. Before I get on to him, can I just mention here with his, so Dominic's home here has this story is so loaded with autobiographical references. You got Rodenhurst, Stonyhurst,
Yeah,
sure.
Stonyhurst. Yeah, it must be.
Unlike the Baskerville Hall, it doesn't look like Stonyhurst, but the
No.
name, So again, it's just harking back to his past. Doyle just does this so much, and really interestingly and cleverly a lot of
Mm,
the time. And we get this again with Sir Dominic Holden himself. My candidate, I'm sure he's actually based on a very eminent military surgeon, Sir Anthony Home,
mm,
Sir Anthony Dixon Home, VC, and who's
mm.
also KCB. So this is the other sort of connection there.
Yeah.
But Sir Anthony Home was a hero of the Indian Mutiny, and he'd won his VC during the Havelock's assault on the besieged residency at Lucknow. And during that assault, Anthony Home, as a young surgeon with the 90th Rifles, was left behind to look after some wounded.
All right.
They, in their own turn, got attacked and held the enemy off for some 22 hours plus.
Mm,
And by the end of this, Home was the only kind of Home and five others were the only fighting fit individuals left.
gosh.
So he earned his VC,
Yeah.
that's for sure. And years later, Conan Doyle met Sir Anthony Home, and it was when Doyle was at Southsea.
Mm,
And in the mid-80s, the local military were short of doctors because a lot of them had to be sent out east for, it's mainly Egypt and the Sudan, for service out there. So they were recruiting local civilian doctors to help
mm.
out. And Doyle volunteered for this. And he met Home, who was interviewing him for this job. And his description occurs in Memories and Adventures. And he goes, "When I was called before the Board of Selection, a savage-looking old army doctor who presided barked out, 'And you, sir, what are you prepared to do?' To which I answered, 'Anything.' It seems that the others had all been making bargains and reservations, so my wholehearted reply won the job." So he went down well with Home, but he was pretty much he was frightened of him. It seems quite clear.
Mm.
And as I say, he was in charge of looking after this recruitment. And Doyle says of him, he was as fierce in speech and in act as in appearance. Everyone was terrified of him. He seemed a most disagreeable old man. And yet, when I was married shortly afterwards, he sent me a most charming message wishing me good fortune. Up to then, I had never had anything from him save a scowl from his thick eyebrows. So I was most agreeably surprised. So we've got this when we first meet Sir Dominic Holden. Hardacre says, "I only saw the red glow of the embers beating upon a huge craggy face with a red Indian nose and cheek, and deep furrows and seams from eye to chin, the
Mm.
sinister marks of hidden volcanic fires.
Mm.
It was a very critical pair of light blue eyes which looked out at me from under shaggy eyebrows like scouts beneath a bush."
Yeah, there you go.
It's
It's the same guy.
the similarity is quite clearly there. And when you get when Sir Dominic is explained to Hardacre what the trouble is in the house and why he and his wife seem so nervous. Dominic says himself, "My nerve was a byword in India. Even the mutiny never shook it for an instant." So I think it's uh, pretty much that Doyle was thinking of Anthony Home when he was creating this character.
That's a great spot. I think that's very
Mm,
convincing.
mm,
And this is an important point for Sir Dominic, because the whole point is that this man is a hero in British eyes. He
mm,
has served during the mutiny. He served uh, probably in the Second Anglo-Afghan War. He may well have received postings elsewhere in the region as well. I mean, the Andaman Islands was a place where
mm,
medics were sent as well after the mutiny. So you can imagine he has
mm,
served in all manner of different conditions. And the whole point here is that Sir Dominic, when Hardacre arrives at Rodenhurst, is a wreck of a man, isn't he? He's a shadow of his former self, and we get that kind of corrupting
mm.
Gothic influence now on this once great, once supremely powerful, scary old man who is now crumbling before his eyes.
I mean, again, look at Sir Anthony Holmes' role of honour. He served in the Crimean War, the Indian Mutiny, the Third China War, the Maori Wars, and the Ashanti War. So he went through all of that, and interestingly as well, with Holden, we are told that he is kind of the leading
Yes.
surgeon in India at the time
Mm,
of his retirement. And just before Sir Anthony Home retired and came back from India to England. Between 1881 to 1885, he was the principal medical officer to the British forces in India.
yeah.
So, these two, it's quite clear that Doyle has a steady model to work on.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm. And it's kind of fun to play about with this idea as well. You can it's probably a bit naughty to do this, but you have to think about another ferocious medic who returned from India. I think it was Dr. Grimesby Roylott in the speckled band with his fierce temper and so on. And you wonder, was there a spark of Anthony Home also written into him?
Oh my goodness. Could he bend pokers?
Well, probably.
Yes. But Anthony Home isn't the only autobiographical element within this story, because you mentioned before, Paul, Salisbury Plain,
Mm,
and we know that in August 1898, Conan Doyle had been on Salisbury Plain because he was invited by his friend Major Arthur Griffiths to attend the British Army's practice manoeuvres
mm,
across Salisbury Plain, where he got to hobnob with a great many of the uh, heroes of the British Army.
mm,
So he'd been on Salisbury Plain fairly recently. There are also elements within Hardacre's character as well, of course, that he is a young doctor. He's struggling for money. He's newly married. But also he has an interest in psychical research. And it's this connection to psychical research that then enters the story once Hardacre arrives at Rodenhurst, because his uncle Sir Dominic knows that he is interested in psychical research, and this has been one of the reasons why he has wanted his nephew to visit him and his wife. Um, so the Society for Psychical Research was formed in 1882 after a London conference, which was really meant to foster scientific research and scrutiny of the supernatural and the unexplained. And its first president was Henry Sidgwick, who was the professor of moral philosophy at Trinity College, Cambridge. And the SPR, as it became known, embarked on a major study of historical and then current evidence for the supernatural. It was a huge two-volume edition called Phantasms of the Living, which came out in 1886. And that included about 700 case studies of apparitions and related phenomena. Now, Conan Doyle joined the Society for Psychical Research in January 1893. So by the time he was writing the story, he'd been pretty much associated with them for 5 years. And his first recorded experience we talked about previously, that came in June 1894 when he joined two researchers, Sidney Scott and Frank Podmore, to investigate a haunted house. Conan Doyle would eventually fall out with the SPR as he became more and more frustrated with their methods, which he felt were rather more prone to
mm,
skepticism than they were to open mindedness. Um, But it's really interesting that this business of psychical research is key to this story, because there is a thread throughout that Conan Doyle is trying to present psychical research as being a highly impartial and scientific endeavor. And we get this right at this early meeting between Hardacre and his uncle, because his uncle says something has happened in the house, but he refuses to tell him on the basis that it might prejudice his investigation.
Yeah, it's actually quite fascinating when you look at the way this subject is introduced into the story, and it's while Hardacre is at dinner with Sir Dominic and Lady Holden.
Mm,
And Hardacre says, I concluded by narrating my experiences when, as a member of the Psychical Research Society, I had formed one of a committee of three who spent the night in a haunted house. Our adventures were neither exciting nor convincing, but such as it was, the story appeared to interest my auditors to a remarkable degree. I mean, this is it's
it's
Doyle
Dorset, isn't
talking of
it?
his own experience. Yeah,
Mm,
when with um, Podmore and Scott,
mm,
he went to investigate a supposedly haunted house at Charmouth in Devon,
mm.
and all three of them concluded that the thing essentially was a fake, and that somebody within the house was rigging up all
Mm.
the supposed phenomena that they experienced. Um,
Although
and
later in his life, he decided that
he changed his
he changed the
mind.
story, didn't he?
Yeah, it is that you can actually go to this and read various accounts that Doyle wrote, and the deeper he gets into spiritualism, the
Mm,
more and more the story changes.
mm.
So by the end, it becomes a story of a haunting, and supposedly a child's skeleton was discovered in the garden, and that must be the source of it all. And Podmore, who was one of his co-investigators in that,
Mm,
was an arch skeptic, very rational and scientific in his approach, and he and Doyle really fell out with one another
yeah.
over this later on. So the story changes, and it also influences the wonderful the best chapter of The Land of Mist,
Yes.
where we have a ghost hunting expedition with Lord John Roxton, who decides to go ghost hunting with a shotgun. And
Yes.
but there are elements of, again, Doyle's own experience wandering into that. So it's something which it did make a great impact on him.
Oh,
But
yes.
the way it's used in this story at this time, before he's really become convinced of the spiritualist crusade, it's done in a far more gentle and, yeah, semi-humorous way.
Mm. So Hardacre then, without knowing what he's really getting into, goes to spend the night in Sir Dominic's distinctly creepy and
Hmm.
gothic laboratory. And Hardacre is particularly drawn to one wall which houses Sir Dominic's pathological specimens. He says, I glanced over them and saw that they really were of very great value and rarity from a pathological point of view. Bloated organs, gaping cysts, distorted bones, odious parasites, a singular exhibition of the products of India. And that products of India bit is going to become really important in a bit. Um, and so he goes to bed and is woken up in the middle of the night by the appearance of a spirit or a spectre or ghost, but a very, very physical one. The description is it was a man, short and squat, dressed in some sort of dark grey gown which hung straight from his shoulders to his feet. The moon shone upon the side of his face, and I saw that it was chocolate brown in colour, with a ball of black hair like a woman's at the back of his head. He walked slowly, and his eyes were cast upwards towards the line of bottles which contained those gruesome remnants of humanity. But he's very distinctly physical and real, to the point where almost it could be somebody else walking into the room, except for the fact that at the having perused this line of specimens, he reaches the end, throws up his arms in horror, and disappears, but not before Hardacre spots that he's missing a hand.
Yes, so we've now got this dramatic moment with the appearance of the Rodenhurst ghost, and again, this Doyle is keeping up this whole wonderful Gothic atmosphere,
Mm,
and again with the whole the specimen jars. I'm reminded of Guy Boothby's Dr. Nicola,
Yes.
We meet
Yeah.
in he often has these various specimen
Specimens on the
jars
wall.
to enhance his sinister appearance and sinister nature. So that's what's all going on here. And as we go on, we're going to see this is all very, very cleverly set up.
Mm. So it's at this point of the story that Hardacre and Sir Dominic swap their experiences and
Mm.
find, in the true spirit of scientific inquiry, that they match. And Sir Dominic gives his explanation as to what is behind all of this. And he explains that it was 10 years ago that he was summoned to Peshawar to for a consultation with a native who was passing through with an Afghan caravan and required his hand amputating. And once the operation had been completed, the Afghan had asked for how much Sir Dominic would charge as a fee, and Sir Dominic said he would take the hand as to go into his collection. And the Afghan demurred at this point, saying that really he needs the hand back at the point of his death so that his body can be whole. But when he discovers that Sir Dominic's going to look after it, he accepts, although he does give that final warning. But remember, Saab, said he, I shall want it back when I am dead. And of course, Sir Dominic laughs at this and promptly puts the hand in a pickle jar, and all is fine and well until there's a fire in his laboratory in Bombay, and then he returns to the UK, and then once he's in Rodenhurst, this mysterious figure starts to appear, and it's Sir Dominic's view that the Afghan native has died and is now coming back for his hand. Um, and this is a great example of what we call the Imperial Gothic. We've talked about it before in previous episodes, but this concept that was put about by Patrick Brantlinger, I think it was in the 80s, that the Victorian and Edwardian literature is littered with examples of the corrupting influence of either the colonies or imperial possessions, or things from the colonies, the imperial possessions, that come back um, to London, to the metropolis, to England, and they essentially bring with them some kind of curse or warning. And we've seen this several times in Conan Doyle's books to this point. Mystery of Cloomber is a classic example, but Sign of Four is as well. You get this kind of stuff everywhere, and of course the underlying assumption or the underlying premise of Brantlinger's argument is that this is evidence of unconscious guilt for empire, and that's reflected in the stories of the time. That's an interesting interpretation when we come to the end of this story, I think, for how Conan Doyle is playing it. But there's another thing going on here, of course, which is that we're getting this idea of a haunted hand, and there are so many examples that we could go into here of stories that Conan Doyle could well be drawing on.
Yeah, I mean, the ones before this, there's probably two principal examples. The Hand by Doyle's favorite French author Guy de Maupassant,
Yeah.
which is a wonderful piece of writing in which you get both a solid story and a story full of evasion.
Yes.
And it's as much about as what remains unwritten between the lines as what's in the story. But there's a cracking good horror story at the center of it, involving a very sinister mummified hand,
Mm.
essentially, which the main character keeps chained to his living room wall.
Yes.
And if you want gothic, that's gothic.
Yes.
Um,
He has that line, doesn't he, that says that the hand always wants to go away, which is why it
yes.
has to be chained up. It's a brilliant story.
Doubtless to say, yeah, it's events unfold in a way that you think they're probably going to unfold, but maybe the explanation is up to you.
Yes.
So there's that, and I think that will have, we know Doyle will certainly have read that. Another one, I think slightly earlier than that, is another author we know Doyle was familiar with, Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu,
Mm.
the great Irish writer of sensational Wilkie Collins-esque mysteries, but also wonderful ghost stories.
Mm. Mm.
And there's in his sprawling behemoth of a novel, The House by the Churchyard in 1863, which is just it's more episodic than plot
Yes.
driven.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's an aside in that called, I think it's Ghost Stories of the Tiled House,
Mm.
and one of these is the authentic narrative of the ghost of a hand, in which there is a wandering hand in that. So that's and yeah, this was a very popular book at the time, and again, I've no doubt that
Mm.
we know Doyle had read Uncle Silas, and I think he'd have read The House by the Churchyard as well.
Mm.
And then, I mean, the whole thing goes on. We have not long after this, W. Jacobs' famous story, The Monkey's Paw, although,
Mhm.
as you say, Mark, that's more of a kind of inversion of the Lucky Rabbit's foot motif,
Yes, yes.
rather than something like this. But there's also, I mean, later on we have The Beast with Five Fingers
Oh,
in the
yes.
1920s by W.F. Harvey,
Mm.
which is another one like the Le Fanu with the hand wandering around. There's also a different take on this, The Hands of Olak by Maurice Renard, which
Mm.
is filmed as Mad Love or The Hands of Olak, in which a concert pianist loses his
Ah,
hands, and
yes.
he has a strangler's hands
Yes,
surgically put on his arms,
he does.
and yeah, all sorts of predictable things start happening from that. So it's a haunted hands in various ways. It's a popular
Yes.
motif. But this, as you say, has also got the fact that it's a cross-cultural
Yeah.
one. So we've got that kind of the Indian element, the as you say, Imperial Gothic element. One wanders into this story as well.
Mm.
So it's a real mix. And I think one of the joys of this with the Imperial Gothic theme is the fact that the story is set up, the quotes I read out earlier, as a classic English ghost story.
Exactly.
And then suddenly it's subverted,
His ghost.
and the
Yeah, that's
ghost
right.
isn't English.
Yeah,
The
that's
ghost
right.
isn't homegrown.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of there's a lot of interesting ideas going on there.
And that's kind of the first subversion of it, isn't it, really? That this
Mm.
English haunted house is being haunted by an Indian ghost
Mm.
or an Afghan ghost. I mean, Conan Doyle is very specific about the description of this
Mm.
individual as well. And it shows that he's very aware of what is going on in the world, I think. So the Pashtun tribes were occupying that region on the border of kind of what is today southeastern Afghanistan, northwest Pakistan, but would have been the border of British India.
Mm.
And their origins are very unclear, but the Pashto language is an Eastern Iranian language, and possibly people from Eastern Iran. But actually, it's a very diverse group then as now in terms of linguistics, culture, and ethnicity, and in fact the sort of poetic tradition, which is a big part of the Pashtun life, is dates back to the Persian Empire in third, fourth century BC as well. There was actually a British medical officer called Henry Walter Bellew, who would have been a contemporary of Sir Dominic's, who wrote several books on Afghanistan, including The Races of Afghanistan in 1880, and he talked a lot about the Pashtun traditions and religions and beliefs. Where Conan Doyle does deviate from fact is that there isn't in Pashtun belief this idea that the body should be whole at the point of death.
Mm.
The Pashtun Wali is the code of the Pashtuns, and that dates back again to the Persian era, and that's has several tenets like hospitality, forgiveness, justice. It has badal, which means revenge, and that's revenge for wrongs and insults that can go on until they have been avenged. So that's very important in this as well. But that idea of the body being whole, it doesn't really fit with any of the sort of pre-Islamic religions of the period of people like the Zoroastrians or the Buddhists or the Hindus. In fact, if anything, it comes from ancient Egypt. And it's notable that in the passage where we're talking about these beliefs of the Pashtun of the Afghan, Conan Doyle does mention ancient Egypt. So that's probably where he's getting this idea from, that the body should be whole at the point of death.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting with that because we've also got to place this in the context of, 1890s adventure writing, essentially,
Mm, mm,
as well. And the Pashtuns were known generally to the British at this time as the Pathans
Mm-hmm.
is the general phrase. I mean, the classic book on them is a later book by a later administrator, Sir Olaf Carreau, who wrote a classic book, the Pathans,
Mm.
on this area. And I think as well that Doyle is just working on this idea of the Muslim
Yes.
belief as well, and this definitely got in the British mindset,
Mm. Mm.
as a kind of, a general, the British believe this about India's Muslims generally. This is how we, the British regarded their beliefs.
Mm.
The other thing, I mean, it's interesting, the appearance of the ghost, where he's describing this long grey robe down to the ground. I think Doyle's getting a bit mixed up here.
Yes.
Basically, I'm not sure where the hair. I mean, there were different types of tribes wore their hair in different
Of course.
ways. But the costume, I think he's getting mixed up here with the kind of the idea. It's essentially the shalwar kameez, which is a two-piece
Yeah.
light costume consisting of trousers and a long light tunic, which came to the knees rather than to the ankles. I mean, you look at Sidney Paget's drawing of this.
Yes,
He looks more like a Chinese ghost
he does.
than somebody from this kind of the Indo-Afghan
Mm.
area. And the other thing is, I think that ties in here is that he talks about Kafiristan, and this I'm pretty sure is straight from Kipling.
Yes.
Because we know that Doyle, one of his favorite Kipling stories was The Man Who Would Be King,
Yeah, of course.
in which Danny Dravot and Peachy Carnahan set out to make themselves kings of Kafiristan.
Mm.
And it's this kind of area that Kafiristan is used in this way as a kind of, this is a kind of no man's land beyond the Hindu Kush.
Yeah, indeed.
And this is what we get in here, and it's adding to the kind of the mystery of this story. Oh, he's from Kafiristan. It's all this kind of back of beyond stuff. I
Yes,
mean, I
back and
think
beyond.
Dominic Holden uses the phrase back of
He does.
beyond. It came from some place back of beyond out there, and that's just to add to the whole atmosphere here. So I think, as ever, with not just with Doyle, but with many of writers of this sort of material, it's a mishmash,
Yeah.
and things are getting thrown into the mix, and just it's a cauldron of
Yeah.
elements which get mixed up, and that's what we've got here.
Yeah, it's that kind of Orientalist, almost a bit like that theosophical stuff that he was so interested
Mm,
in, 10 years earlier,
mm,
just a rag bag
uh,
of different
yeah.
ideas. And this area of Kafiristan may well have been on his mind because it was in
Mm,
for a couple of reasons. I mean, one of them is that the previous year, 1897, there'd been the siege of Malakand, and
mm,
this is where the British forces had been besieged by the Pashtuns, and they were eventually relieved by a British column, which
mm.
famously included a young Lieutenant Winston Churchill.
Yeah, and was led by the wonderfully named General Sir Bindon Blood.
So Bindon Blood.
Yes.
That's very good. My goodness.
Mm,
Yeah, and Churchill actually wrote his first book was the story
mm,
of the Malakand Field Force, came out in 1897. So
mm,
that is sort of almost immediately before Conan
mm.
Doyle's writing the story. But also his brother Innes was out there, wasn't
Yes, it was about this sort of time that Innes was posted, who's an officer in the Royal Artillery,
he? Mm,
posted out to India, and this time was stationed at a town named Ambala, which is not far from Simla,
mm,
which is the winter capital of the Raj. But when Calcutta and Delhi both proved too hot,
yeah.
then the government moved lock, stock, and barrel to Simla in the foothills of the Himalayas.
Mm,
So his brother was out in this sort of area, so as you say, it would be in his mind, and it's to the kind of the imperial British dreamer.
mm,
It is the bed of imperial adventure in India.
yeah.
The borderlands between northern India and Afghanistan through into Central Asia.
Mm, yeah.
Mm,
So Hardacre, now armed with this knowledge of Sir Dominic's previous encounter, is then reminded of an instance he's read in one of his psychical research books, and he heads home to read the volume, and he gets this description. In the case of earthbound spirits, some one dominant idea obsessing them at the hour of death is sufficient to hold them in this material world. They are the amphibia of this life and of the next, capable of passing from one to the other as the turtle passes from land to water. The causes which may bind a soul so strongly to a life which its body has abandoned are any violent emotion. Avarice, revenge, anxiety, love, and pity have all been known to have this effect. As a rule, it springs from some unfulfilled wish, and when the wish has been fulfilled, the material bond relaxes, which suggests to Hardacre that what he really needs to do is to find this Afghan's hand and return it to him. And so he goes to his old friend Jack Hewitt down at Shadwell's Seamen's Hospital to try to recover one. And it just so happens that Hewitt has recently amputated from the hands of a Lascar who was unfortunately fallen into the workings of a steam winch, which sounds really particularly horrible, I think. But this is a moment, it's a tiny little interlude in this story, but it's an interesting one because Conan Doyle is drawing on a very real setting. The Shadwell Seamen's Hospital is heavily based on a real hospital that was based in Greenwich, but has an interesting history because from the 1820s through to the 1870s, it was the HMS Dreadnought, an old Royal Navy vessel that had been decommissioned and was permanently berthed at Greenwich to become a three-decker hospital where they served all manner of sailors passing through. Because the tradition then was that any merchant seaman from any ethnicity, background, culture could get support from the Seamen's Hospital, and so the Dreadnought did it for 50 years, and then in 1870 it moved on land to Greenwich, where it started to support about 300 patients at any one point in time. And the records of that Seamen's Hospital survive, and there are many references to Lascars. And we should say that the term Lascars is a generic term for seafarers from India and from the surrounding regions. And it was very, very broadly applied to people from, as far as parts of sort of very distant parts of Asia, Malay Peninsula, even into China as well. But whenever they required help and support, they would be taken to the Dreadnought or to the Seamen's Hospital. And they did more than just actually look after the medical problems of these people. There's a record from the Seamen's Hospital from 1894 of a Lascar called Tobin Oller, who was employed as a greaser on a steamship, but was admitted as a destitute in July 1894. And the hospital not only sort of fitted him up so that he was well and could go on his way, they also gave him board and lodging and then put him in touch with a shipping office so that he could find employment. So it's quite a broad-based sort of support system for people there. It's one of those strange descriptions where what Conan Doyle is depicting is actually a genuine place, but my goodness, does it feel gothic as well? This is something straight out of the Limehouse opium dens of the Twisted Lip. This idea that there's this Lascar hospital where amputations are taking place. But fortunately, Hewitt can provide him with a hand, and so Hardacre merrily returns to Rodenhurst with one to provide to the ghost.
You have to wonder about the condition they'd be in if he's fallen into a steam winch.
Well, hopefully it wasn't the hands. But yes, it's pretty horrendous stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, so Hardacre is rather delighted that his friend Hewitt has been able to supply him with the spare hand. So he does another sit up through the night, puts the hand in place. Ghost reappears, looks delighted at the hand has suddenly appeared, and then there's I think it was a shriek from the ghost, and he throws the jar. There's a great crash as the jar with the hand hits the floor. Ghost disappears, and Sir Dominic comes out. I hope you has he hurt you? Has he hurt you? Kind of, and there's no harm done to anybody, but they wonder what's going on here. And then you get Hardacre saying, I lay there worrying over the problem and lamenting my own failure. With the first light of morning, there was the Lascar's hand still lying upon the floor to remind me of my fiasco. I lay looking at it, and as I lay, suddenly an idea flew like a bullet through my head and brought me quivering with excitement out of my couch. I raised the grim relic from where it had fallen. Yes, it was indeed so. And was the left hand of the Lascar. So yes, the ghost, as we've been told, was missing his right hand.
Yeah.
So realizing this, Hardacre's on the first train back to London. It's his friend Hewitt. Have you got the other hand still? And it's not gone into the incinerator yet. So he's able to go back with it and provide a right hand and just
Mm.
wait for the ghost to reappear again.
Mm. And
Mm,
this time the ghost is extremely happy
mm,
and disappears. And it's well, this is the second subversion of the ghost story. The first is that it's not an English ghost in an English castle, as it were. The
mm,
second is this comic moment. It is played for laughs, really.
mm,
That Hardacre got the wrong hand, and Douglas Kerr, who we had back on the podcast in episode 30, wrote a really interesting article entitled "Conan Doyle and the Rhetoric of Genre," which came out in the Journal of the English Association a couple of years ago, and he really talks about how what Conan Doyle is doing with the story here is he knows his audience understands Gothic, he understands the Gothic tropes, and they have a kind of genre literacy. And what he's doing is he's constantly finding ways to play with that, to play with
mm,
expectations. It shows both an awareness on Conan Doyle's part, but also the deep knowledge that the audience would have had of a ghost story and how a ghost story typically plays out.
mm.
And this, of course, is being completely inverted here at the end.
It's been inverted and then it goes back with the ending. You've almost got it's almost a fairy tale ending
Yeah,
with he's almost the last card, smiling, saying goodbye. He can leave. He's no longer an earthbound spirit.
yeah,
And he can leave, Sir Dominic and Lady Holden in peace. And everything is wrapped up in that way. So it reverts to a kind of traditionalism at the end as well.
yeah,
So it's moving in and out
yeah.
constantly throughout. It's the structure of the story is, it is particularly interesting.
Mm. I
Mm,
think this is where the Imperial Gothic is important to come back, because if we were to read this as a sort of straight play on Imperial Gothic, then the argument would be that this is imperial guilt being played out in the
mm,
course of this story. But actually, at the end here, the native ghost is placated. It
mm,
becomes in fact, becomes a friendly, compliant native. It even does
mm,
I think there's the low bow, the salam,
mhm,
as they say. Um, but actually, he's been conned, hasn't he? I mean, the white man has given him somebody else's hand and
mm,
got the
mm,
better of him.
mm,
So there's an element to which, as much as we might think of Imperial Gothic as being this gnawing anxiety about imperialism and all that came with it. In a way, Conan Doyle is saying at the end of this that actually the natural order of things has been restored, and that the white man is still at the
mm,
top of the tree, and the natives are once more in their box and
mm.
compliant again. So it sort of inverts almost the kind of Imperial Gothic idea as well.
I mean, I'm not entirely convinced myself by the argument about the guilt, and I find more with Imperial Gothic, these objects, they are the object version of the other
Yes, that's right.
coming out, and of course they're sinister, and there's
Yeah,
there's going to be there's trouble connected to them. I mean, it's at the heart of the whole mummy genre.
yeah, that's right.
It is this, you mess with this stuff, it's going to come to get you.
Yeah.
There's just got that whole sinister element to it, which again Doyle's playing about with in this story. You end up with a happy ghost at the end,
Mm,
but there are elements where you've got parts of this could be going in a very sinister direction, and it veers off in another one.
yeah.
But you got where I mentioned earlier the possible influence of Kipling with placement, but he's his Kipling's ghost stories tend to be more sinister.
Yeah, they are.
When you
Yeah.
think of things like the Phantom Rickshaw, a wonderful psychological ghost story, or the which I think is possibly the best, The Lost Legion,
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which is markedly sinister.
Very.
Whereas in this, you've got this is a kind of a gentle ghost story. It's got all the gothic trappings and it puts you in the right place, but it's a gentle ghost story at the end of it.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that this story put me in mind of was a book I read last year called The Ghosts of the British Museum,
Mm,
which is by Noah Angel. And that is really about sort of colonial looters' cursed objects.
mm,
And it's ostensibly a series of ghost stories told by the curators and security guards and cleaners at the British Museum. But it also has a very political purpose in that he's very critical of the British Museum and holding on to objects. The Brown Hand is a perfect illustration, actually,
mm,
of what he's talking about. He talks about cursed objects almost like a kind of portable stone tape
mm,
theory, that they're
mm,
imbued with all the pain and misery of their experience, and then that's carried across with them into the museums. Um, but the thing that really reminded me here is that Angel talks about there's a tension between the kind of rational scientific study of these objects, which might have very great spiritual and religious significance for the
mm,
cultures that they've come from. And you get exactly that same tension here between the kind of the dispassionate, disbelieving scientific
mm,
study of Sir Dominic and Hardacre and the lived experience of the ghost. It's played out perfectly in The
mm.
Brown Hand. So it's amazing how these stories that can be written, 130 years ago can have contemporary relevance in
Oh,
a political
completely.
argument that was made last year.
Mm.
You know,
And I think as well as the level of ghost story, the other thing is the two main protagonists in this, Dominic Holden and Dr. Hardacre. They're both scientists, they're both doctors, and this is a ghost story where there's no doubt about the existence of the ghost.
yeah,
It's there. It's, as you said, it's got a solidity to it. It can shake
yeah,
people awake.
yeah,
It's not an ethereal ghost. This is very much a material ghost,
yeah.
and it exists. Doyle doesn't go into any of the implications
No, he doesn't.
of that for these two men.
No,
That surely it's going to shake at the foundations of some of their scientific belief, but that's too big a question
yeah.
for a short story like this. But it is interesting that the ghost, there's no doubt about the ghost's existence.
I think the interpretation would be that now that they've got verifiable scientific proof of the existence of ghosts, that just goes into their worldview, and actually they
Mm,
just absorb it because
mm,
that's how Conan Doyle thinks all scientists should
mm,
work with the supernatural and the unexplained. Once you've got proof, it becomes part of your worldview, and then we
mm,
just accept it. But let's talk then. I think as we're reaching the end of the podcast, let's talk about this as a unconventional ghost story, because I wondered how the great master of the ghost story would have responded to the Brown Hand, and that's Montague Rhodes James.
mm,
And M.R. James was, we know, a fan of Sherlock Holmes at the very least,
mm,
because he devoured The
mm.
Hound of the Baskervilles when it came out in serial form. And he was probably aware of Conan Doyle's Gothic writings, but in his views on what makes a good ghost story, the Brown Hand definitely does not conform to all of those.
Now, I think generally, as you say, that James was a fan of Conan Doyle's detective fiction, but I don't know. I think he'd have liked some of the Gothic horror stuff.
Hmm.
But Conan Doyle was no great producer of ghost stories.
No.
He only produced about five, really, and that would be including Selecting a Ghost, which is a spoof of the
Yes,
genre,
spoof.
and there's no
Yeah.
actual ghost in it. He does crossover stuff, like the Leather Funnel or the Silver Mirror,
Yeah.
or Through the Veil, things like
Hmm.
that. But he didn't. I don't think he quite mastered the ghost story, and
No.
with the ones which are actually ghost stories, the ghosts are either gentle, as in this case ultimately, or humorous.
Yeah, that's right.
So James would not have liked this because in the preface to More Ghost Stories of an Antiquary, um, M.R. James wrote, "Another requisite, in my opinion, is that the ghost should be malevolent or odious.
Yeah.
Amiable and helpful apparitions are all very well in fairy tales or in local legends, but I have no use for them in a fictitious ghost story."
Yeah.
And James, he lives up to his word with his own stories. Whereas in this, we get a ghost which because he's shaking Sir Dominic awake in an angry way. He could be going in that direction, but doesn't. But I mean, the only similarity I would say between the Brown Hounded and M.R. James is the tactility of the ghosts.
Yes.
James's ghosts are, they're not
Yeah.
ethereal spooks either. They're not even ghosts, half of them really. But that's
Yeah.
another discussion altogether.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think James. I think James would have felt let down by the end of this one.
Absolutely. It just doesn't comply to his version of the ghost story, which has become the kind of the hallmark for the successful ghost stories. And so that's the really interesting thing, though, I think, about the Brown Hand, is that it plays so much on expectation and convention, and comes up with something that I think is still, at the end of the day, extremely rewarding. I think this is one of the best of the round the fire stories, and it's and like you said right at the beginning, there are echoes here that are going to take him into his greatest Gothic work, which is arguably The Hound of the Baskervilles.
And there's another odd stepping stone comes into that equation in just over a year after the publication of The Brown Hand in the Strand magazine. Strand magazine publishes another story by a different author called Followed, by L.T. Mead and Robert Eustace, which is also set on Salisbury Plain. It's not a ghost story, it's more of a horror story. And it again also mixes up this very English moorland setting and a very English manor house with exoticism, imperial Gothic. There's a sinister black servant, and there's a reptile house, and it's one of the snakes gets out, and there's all sorts of happenings around Stonehenge with it. It's all very, very melodramatic, and it actually shows, if you read that and then read The Brown Hand, how superior a writer
Oh
Doyle
yes,
is.
my
But
goodness,
there's also an element within Followed which may have where the snake is put onto its putative victim by the scent of a boot,
yeah,
and so in itself Doyle may have, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it may have. So all these things tie in to each other. It's all about the same time. It's all 1899 through to 1900, 1901. That this is all going on.
and all in the Strand magazine as
All
well.
in the Strand magazine, and all illustrated by Sidney Paget.
Yeah. So that brings us to the end of our discussion of the story of the Brown Hand. If you want to read more, you can find the show notes at doingsofdoyle.com. And please check out how to become a patron supporter via Patreon or PayPal. The details are there at the website. So, Paul, what are we looking at next month?
Well, next time we're not entirely fixed yet, but we're hoping to have another interview show. So watch this space.
Yeah, that will be great. So join us next month. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Goodbye. But Sir Anthony Hope it. Oh, I've done it. You got me. You got me.
One of us was going to do it.
There we go. One of us got it.
The Prisoner of Rodenhurst.
There we go.
That's my friend, Thing.
What a charming helper.
He's been my companion since childhood. You don't think he's peculiar, do you?
Of course not. We must accept our friends for what they are.